It was predictable in the way that there was only ever one way it could end. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Read, Share, Repeat, where we talk about books from the perspective of an aspiring fantasy author. Me, Carrie Share. Well, today is actually the start of another reading vlog, but not just any kind of reading vlog, because as I was picking out my next books to read, I noticed that my ebook selection and my physical book selection actually really closely mirrored each other. They had a lot of the same buzzwords, concepts, themes. So what I thought I would do is actually do a Who Wore It Better style reading vlog where I read both at the same time. I sounded so Southern just then. The same time, where I read both at the same time and determine which one I prefer better, which author took the concept in a way that I preferred. So the two books that I will be reading for this new kind of reading vlog are first, The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri and The Final Strife by Sara El-Arifi. Both of these books are Middle Eastern inspired fantasy, both feature a sapphic romance, and both contain themes of overthrowing those in power. They're even approximately the same length, around 550 pages, and Tasha Suri even blurbed The Final Strife. So I think that there are a lot of similar concepts that will be found in these books. I haven't read either of them yet, so I won't really know until I get into them. But as I was reading the synopses, I just noticed that they just shared things in common. Obviously, I can't say at this moment whether or not these two books are actually similar, but they do sound a little bit similar. So here we are. And like I said, my goal is to be reading these at the same time. So that way I can directly compare my feelings to both. At the end of this video, what I would like to do is do a caw pile breakdown and rank one against the other. I don't want anyone to think that I am directly pitting these books against each other. Like I said, this is mostly just for fun because I noticed that they have similar themes and concepts. I have read some of Tasha Suri's work before. I read The Empire of Sand and thought it was just okay. And I did read the first 20% of The Final Strife before, just over a year ago, and I softy DNF'd it because I wasn't really feeling it in that moment. So I've already actually read the first 10% of The Jasmine Throne. So next I will read the first 10% of The Final Strife and then check in with you guys to let you know how I feel about where the two of them stand in comparison to each other at that checkpoint. Hey y'all, it is now just a little bit later and I have just hit the 10% mark of The Final Strife by Sara El-Arifi. So now I can do my 10% comparison between The Final Strife and The Jasmine Throne. I'm going to go ahead and start with The Final Strife because it is fresher in my mind. I had started this book at the tail end of 2023 going into 2024 and ultimately decided to soft DNF it because I wasn't really vibing with it in the moment. And some of the issues that I had last year are still present. I'm still noticing them. Largely that the writing style tends to rely on a method of telling rather than showing that involves the characters kind of going, well, as you know, Bob, and then saying something lore relevant that the other character already knows. It's happened a number of times where the characters are just saying very obvious basic world building things to each other as part of normal conversation that wouldn't normally be part of conversation. It's just being said for our benefit, and that is extremely, it pulls you out. At least it pulls me out. It's really kind of silly. And I believe this is Sara El-Arifi's debut, so maybe that is just a little bit of inexperience there. But I will say it is distracting and goofy. And it's just why no one would say that in this world because everyone already knows this. There is that part that is still bugging me. It's not as egregious as I remembered, but there were still a few moments that I actually tabbed that was come on, try a little harder than that to give us this information. Other things are the main character, Scylla. I'm trying to give the author some grace here because Scylla is not very likable in that she's currently a drug addict, and then that's pretty much her defining personality, is that all she wants to do is chase oblivion. So I'm trying to be that's not doesn't make her necessarily a bad character, or that's not necessarily a fault of the writer, but it is sort of like, if I have to read the term joba seed one more time, I'm going to punch myself in the face, because it comes up at least once a page, it feels like. That is all she is thinking about. Every action she is taking is bent towards the temporary high that she's getting from the drug. Like I said, I get it. I get that we're being shown this as a snapshot of what her life is like before whatever the inciting incident may be. I haven't gotten there yet, but it also feels like a little too much, because like, she's been doing this for 6 years. Surely there is something else in her life, but like literally every single action she has taken has been to get more drugs. And I don't know, maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh, and I understand that drug addiction is like that, but I don't necessarily need a realistic portrayal in fiction. I don't know. I'm sort of bored with that motivation, and I'm sort of bored with reading about it constantly. So it's been just over 50 pages. Actually just over 60 pages, because I wanted to finish the chapter, and that's pretty much everything that she has done for 50 pages has been doing drugs and working to get more drugs. And I'm bored. So there is that. I'm intrigued by the concept of the plot. I'm going to get into very minor spoilers here because I'm only 10% of the way in. But essentially, she was born as part of the ruling class. She was kidnapped by a rebellion group of the lower class and swapped. So she was swapped for a lower class baby. So she was stolen by the lower class, and in her place, a lower class baby was put in her crib, with the idea that this highborn child would be raised among the lowborn and then go back to like the ruling class and establish herself as one of the leadership, and then use that to turn the tides and hopefully bring more equity across the empire. Okay, got all that? But of course the rebellion was found out, and it was almost universally slaughtered, and she is the only one left, and now she feels kind of aimless and driftless, and all that to say, I like that concept of a plot where she has to go back to where she was born and reclaim her birthright, but in the name of the lower class to bring them, better conditions. It's just hard because the main character doesn't care about that more. All she cares about is the drugs. And so I'm trying to stay strong. Surely this will get better. What I am continually reminded by is, of course, Tasha Suri's blurb on the very front of the book that says, "There are no chosen ones here, only bad choices and blood." And that makes me nervous that Scylla is never going to make better choices, or at least do better, which is fine. Like I said, not every character has to be likable. Not everyone has to be a hero. I don't know. I'm just I'm wary of what is to come. And then lastly, the last point that I noticed is the author actively contradicts herself at one point. It's hard to explain. In this world, the higher class has red blood. The lower class has blue blood, and then the slaves has clear blood. Scylla has been living among the blue-blooded class as one of them, but the drug that she takes stains her mouth red. At one point, she's wandering through the streets high on drugs, and in the narration there's a comment that says, "She waved to a few children, though one of them ran away in tears, screaming that Scylla's mouth was full of blood." But these are children who are blue bloods, and they are raised in a community of strictly blue bloods. But the drug is making her teeth red, her mouth red. Why would a blue-blooded child see red and think bloody mouth? That just actively contradicts itself. So I think that's probably because this was a first effort. I also realize that that's a little bit nitpicky, but it's something that draws you out. It's something that pulls you out of the story when something actively does not make sense within its own context of the lore. So that is all I have to say so far about the first 10% of the final Strife. As for the Jasmine Throne, I just have a lot of questions. I think Tasha Suri is writing a very fine line so far in the first 10% of tempting you, enticing you with a little bit of lore while also holding back the details so that you want to keep reading. And personally, I love that. I love that method of being pulled along. I don't want everything told to me up front, which is why this is so silly. But it was almost getting to a point where I felt like she was writing that line too hard. And it was a few times straying into, this is I just need a little bit more detail. But it's not quite enough to make me like mad at it. I'm just like, okay, I'm ready. Give me more. Tell me more. So in this book, we open up on a princess of the emperor being imprisoned for some offense we still have not been told yet. Something that tainted her in the eyes of her brother, and was worthy of, she was offered the choice to basically commit like a religious self-sacrifice to purify herself, or this imprisonment, and she chose imprisonment. She is being kept basically drugged at all times and isolated and kept in this prison where something horrific has happened deliberately to kind of horrify her, to prevent her from engaging in whatever activity got her in trouble in the first place. We still don't know. We are also following a young woman named Pramila, and she was a member of a religious order that was basically cleansed by the current emperor, or maybe the former emperor. Anyway, the empire. This religious practice and the culture that it came from, they were at one time the rulers of this continent, but they were eventually defeated. They venerate these magical beings that gave them special powers, I guess. And this religious order was, I guess, continuing that practice, or maybe trying to bring it back so that they could reclaim their former glory. And then the empire came in and wiped them out. And she was a part of this religious order, but she managed to survive the cleansing and is now just trying to survive. And that's all I got. I don't really know just yet what the plot is going to be. I know that these two characters, the emperor's sister and this maidservant girl, are going to hook up at some point and do something. And that's all I know. So if I'm looking at the two of these books, I guess I would say I'm more curious about what's going on with the Jasmine Throne, because so far the final Strife has not given me a whole lot to be curious about. It has given me more to be like, let's get on with it about. But that being said, I feel like I know, I kind of have a sense of what the shape of this plot will be. And maybe I'm wrong. I know what the original goal was. And so maybe she doesn't necessarily pursue that original goal, but maybe it's something in that direction and accounting for her new outlook on life. Whereas I don't know what Malini, the emperor's sister, even did to get imprisoned. We know that her brother is kind of a tyrant and a religious zealot. Probably nothing really that egregious, but we don't know what she did to offend her brother and get her imprisoned. Don't really know what her goal is, because she doesn't have one. She's being kept in a drug-induced haze and isolated and kept apart, and she's under like this watchful eye of this woman who's loyal to her brother to make sure that she doesn't act out or get herself into any more trouble. That's where we're at. 10% is not very deep into any book, but I usually know by the 10% mark if I want to continue. I do want to continue both of these books. I'm very curious about what is going on in the Jasmine Throne, and I would like to see if Scylla, I don't want to say redeems herself, but at least gets a little bit more right. I don't want to read 500 more pages of just her being a drug addict who is being dragged along whatever mission she is going to undertake. But I do want to see, I want to see what happens. So I won't be DNFing either of these yet. I do reserve the right. I usually do not DNF if I am above 50%. Like I said, I normally know at 10% if it's for me, but you know, if it's so horrible, I usually try to DNF before 50%, because after 50%, I just feel like I've invested too much time and energy to give up, and I'd rather count it towards my stats than DNF it. So I am going to put the books down for now. I have to get some writing done. So tomorrow my plan is to get to the 25% mark of both. That would be just over 100 pages for each of them. And then I'll check in with you again once I'm at the 25% mark. Hey y'all, checking in for another reading update. Earlier today, I hit the 25% mark of both the final Strife and the Jasmine Throne. So I wanted to check in and do another quick comparison for my feelings on both of these books. Today I'll start with the Jasmine Throne. The thing I find the most interesting so far about the Jasmine Throne is that I don't really feel particularly strongly about any of the political factions in this book. Obviously, the emperor and those currently in power at the highest level of the government are pretty horrible, horrendous people who should be overthrown. But some of the ways that the rebel groups are being described and the secondary nation under this empire who used to be in power are talked about makes me kind of think that they weren't exactly good people when they had power either. It's not outright stated, but it does sort of give me the feeling that they were also committing genocide and very strongly believed in their own supremacy. So I don't really think that the rebel group and the characters who want to support a return to those glories are necessarily good either. Oops, I better do this before I forget. Otherwise, people are not going to get paid. Let's go ahead and pay some people. That being said, the current leadership definitely needs to go. So I am willing to see where the rest of the story goes. I just don't feel super strongly about the superiority of one over the other. I think they're just both probably bad. I'm super curious about the magic system also. Our primary POV character was an acolyte of this ancient religion, and they were training these children to basically take up the fight to restore their nation to its former glory. After generations, these children suddenly started developing powers, so they were getting really excited that maybe the time was near for their, their moment to take back power. And then, of course, something horrific happened. The emperor found out, and they were all slaughtered. Our primary POV character was one of those children who survived the massacre, and so she has very weak magical abilities, but she also has gaps in her memory for unknown reasons. And so what she has been struggling with is, does she just try to make her current life as good as it can be, or does she throw her lot back in with the rebels as she had been raised to do before the massacre? And I find that a really interesting POV. Again, because of my ambivalence towards her faction, I'm not super invested in where it goes. The only character I feel really interested in is Princess Malini and why she was in prison in the first place. We still don't know. There has been implications that it could be for a very, very minor offense. The emperor, her brother, seems to be very pious in their religion, and something that's come up a number of times is unclean women. And so it could be something very simple as having an affair, but we have gotten absolutely no other clues other than it was probably a sex-based religious discrimination offense, and that's about it. And I'm just so curious to know what she did to have her thrown out. Now, a capricious emperor doesn't need that strong of a reason, but I'd still like to know what it is. She's the only character I feel like I'm actively rooting for in this story. Everyone else I just feel sort of ambivalent about. I'm interested in the plot, but like the players, I'm just sort of whatever about, except for Malini. I want to know what she did, and I want to know how she's going to navigate this imprisonment, and if she's going to get out, if she's going to get revenge on her brother. That's the part I'm interested in, and so far we haven't really gotten much of that, so I'm hoping as we move into this next section of the plot that we get more. So that's the Jasmine Throne. As for the final Strife, I'm not gonna lie, I'm struggling. I am struggling. This book so far has just reinforced something that I have kind of always known about myself, in that I don't like unlikable protagonists. I don't like anti-heroes. I don't like protagonists who are just bad people. And while I don't think the protagonists in this book are bad people, they are kind of insufferable and just so whiny and so tired of reading from the entitled POVs of these two characters. And for that reason, I don't think this book is ever going to be a smash hit for me. I just don't like reading about those kinds of characters. Like, that was part of the reason that I DNF'd Jade City. I don't want to read about bad people doing bad things, even if they are the protagonist of the story. Now, we've finally gotten to a point where things are finally going to take a turn into what I hope is a more interesting plot, because so far it's just been set up for these two characters, primarily Scylla, who I'm just like so kind of over right now. She's very pathetic. I'm over it. I don't need to read 100 pages of that, but that's what we got. But now, like I said, we're finally to a point where that's probably going to start shifting. So I'm hopeful for the next part of the plot. That first 100 pages was really, really rough and really tough for me to read. I found myself all day today, I've been telling myself, I just need to read 60 pages to get to the next checkpoint. And it still took a lot of mental energy to pick it up. I just don't feel engaged. I'm hoping that that will change. But as far as this little experiment goes, I don't see a way that I will prefer the final Strifes over the Jasmine Throne, just because I don't like these kinds of characters. Now, I don't feel super invested in a lot of the Jasmine Throne's characters either, but I don't actively dislike them either. So I am seeing kind of where my preferences are already, which may make the rest of this experiment a little superfluous, but I'm going to carry on. My goal is to have both of these books finished by the end of the weekend. I would like to hit the 50% mark tomorrow of both of them and then finish them out on Sunday. Now, that's a big ask because both of these books are 550 pages, which would mean reading like 500 pages on Sunday. But I'm going to do my best. But I've been in a really great reading mood. And again, with the forward momentum that both of these plots are about to take with this inciting incident, as it were, I think that it'll be easier to read both of them. I'm going to leave you with that. Like I said, my plan is to tackle big chunks of both of them tomorrow, and then I will check in with you at the 50% mark. Hello, everyone. It is time to give you my final thoughts on the Jasmine Throne and the final Strife. Yes, I said final thoughts. I know I was supposed to check in at 50% for each of these books. However, one of them I just hit a stride and just read straight through to the end, while the other one I really struggled to finish. So let's get into my thoughts. First, we will talk about the Jasmine Throne. And it may not be surprising to you to learn that this is the book that I ended up binge reading. I was kind of back and forth at the 25% mark. I wasn't really sure about some of the dynamics that were playing out, and I wasn't really sure of like where it was going, and there were a lot of complicated ideas that I think I liked, but I was having a hard time getting my head around. But as I said, I got to the 50% mark, and then I dragged myself to the 50% mark of the final Strife to keep pace. But when I hit that checkpoint, I did not want to even wait to film an update. I just wanted to keep reading the Jasmine Throne. I just wanted to keep going and keep going and keep going. So it was at the 50% mark that the political intrigue started picking up, and that is my bread and butter. I love it. You put some political intrigue in a book and I am going to eat it up. And so that really helped. It wasn't like a main focus, I would say, not in the way that I think of political intrigue. Obviously, the politics are a big part of what's going on in this story, but it's sort of removed because of the circumstances, especially Priya not being a part of the intrigue. She's just been sucked into it, and Malini like having to kind of overcome the prison, the circumstances that her brother put her in. I was really interested to see Bhumika, who was another character. I don't know if I have mentioned her even at the 25% mark, but she is another character who is like, she belongs to the country that is being oppressed and marries into a noble family of the oppressor, and is doing her best to use her position to help her people and to mitigate the damage. But there's only so much she can do. She is just one woman, and her strategy of mitigating damage can't keep up with the rapid changes that come into the mix. And I found that really compelling, to watching her try to toe the line of I'm going to keep the peace because I think this will do the least harm to the innocent people who are going to be affected by what's going on. And then watching her come to her limit and be like, and she didn't even snap. She just recognized that she had hit the end of what she could do with that approach. And she just was like, okay, time to take a different route. And I really admired that about her. She ended up being one of my favorite characters because of how pragmatic she was and how just forward thinking and clear headed she was throughout everything that was going on. She and Priya had a very kind of contentious relationship because of their history, and they were constantly kind of butting heads. I ended up really liking their dynamic. I liked their the way that how differently they viewed things, and how much that they wanted the same things but saw different paths to get there, and that caused friction. I really liked that. And then there's the leader of the rebels, who is also very, very close to both Bhumika and Priya. We obviously don't want this country to be oppressed anymore, like violently oppressed, which they are currently. It's pretty clear that Ashok is not the answer either. And I enjoyed kind of seeing that play out in Priya's mind as well. Like, yes, I want the same things you do, but not in the same way. And so if Bhumika was is mitigating damage, Ashok was burn it all down, Priya was trying to find the middle ground between those two, and there really wasn't one, and trying to find her way through that while also just trying to keep herself together and trying to save the people she loves, just the few people that she loves, because these are the people she can extend her influence to. I was really compelled by. And then the only thing I will say, and I'm not going to get into spoilers here, but the ending, I would say it wasn't predictable in the way that you guess the ending. It was predictable in the way that there was only ever one way it could end. And that's not a knock in this case. Being predictable a lot, as you know, is one of my pet peeves. So the ending wasn't predictable in the way that it was like the author was trying to string us along, but hid their tracks very badly. No, it was always going to end this way. And I feel like the author made that really clear without spelling it out for you. It's a very fine line to walk, and I think Tasha Suri did it very well. My only quibble is just, I guess I will have to get into spoilers to specifically voice this. So I'm going to put a spoiler tag right here if you don't want to know the very, very, very end of this book, and you can come back when the watermark is gone. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1, go. When Malini was presented with the choice to take power and declare herself empress, I guess I kind of hoped that she would do it for better reasons. But at one point in her inner monologue, she was thinking that, no, I want power for power. I want power for me, for personal reasons, not because it's for the betterment of people. No, I mean, in a way it is. I mean, I guess we'll find out. So I was kind of hoping that after everything that she had been through and everything, that it was more altruistic. But I guess I can't say that I'm entirely surprised either. I guess I can't fault Tasha Suri either for not making her this perfect angel of altruism. That was my only quibble with the ending. Like I said, I knew it was coming. I think probably around the 50% mark, I was like, this is going to end with Malini seizing control for herself. Rao's prophecy name, that was pretty well telegraphed as well. I always knew that he was going to be the one to put her in power. I always knew it was going to end that way. I guess I just hoped that it was more, that she had more hesitancy of having that much power. But instead she saw it and was like, nope, perfect, this is mine now. So I guess we'll see how that plays out in the later installments. Okay, spoiler off. And speaking of all that, non-spoilery is, I really loved Malini, seeing her come into her element with the political wheeling and dealing in the last 35% of this book. Really loved seeing her really come into her element and see what she was prior to the start of this book, what we saw hints at it and people referencing it, and how she was very good at manipulating people, and actually seeing her do it was so satisfying. And that was when the political intrigue was yes, bitch, give me more of this. And I hope we get more of it in the later books. Yeah, I ended up really, really liking it. It wasn't quite what I expected. especially like my thought of it as being a Middle Eastern fantasy. It is here, I guess I should say that I would not describe it as Middle Eastern per se. It is specifically Indian, very, very specifically Indian. That's very distinct from Middle Eastern. But like I said, I enjoyed it. So for my Caw Pile breakdown, I gave the characters an 8. I said I liked all the characters' perspectives, which is true. Even Ashok, who is not a good person, I think, and had violent goals, even if they were in the name of independence and like freedom for his people. I feel pretty confident in saying that if he had gotten what he wanted, it would not just be freedom, it would be turning the sword back on the oppressors, and also all of the innocent people, so, but all that to say, I still liked reading from his perspective. Atmosphere is 7. I said it felt a bit disjointed, but I liked it. Writing 7, easy to read and enjoy. Plot 7 was a little loosey-goosey at first. Intrigue 6, picked up towards the end, which is what I was saying about Malini. Logic 7 made sense. Everyone behaved appropriately, and by appropriately I mean like for their characters and what their motivations were. And enjoyment an 8, had fun, can't wait to read more, for a final star rating of 4 stars. So that was the Jasmine Throne. I think I'm going to go ahead and read the second one from the library as well, and if I end up liking the second one, I may just go ahead and buy the series. Now, the final Strife. Here's the thing. I don't know that it's necessarily the book's fault that I didn't read it for almost a week. I kind of spiraled a little bit last week and I wasn't really doing anything at all productive, but I do think it was at least partially the book's fault that I just did not want to pick it up. I was not super in love with hardly anything about this book except the plot. However, the plot, even if you just look at the plot from like a Caw Pile breakdown, it's one of 7 elements. And so in that regard, only one element was interesting to me and the rest was really dragging it down. So it did pick up. The beginning was objectively the worst part. The first 15, maybe 20% was really, really, really difficult to get through. Really not interesting, really repetitive and not super instructive as to what the rest of the book was going to be. It was just very not good. After Scylla meets Honor around the 20% mark and the actual plot kicks off, that's when things start to ease up and I felt it was less of a burden to read. That continued to get better. However, I just did not feel compelled to pick this book up very much. It was like I had to schedule time to read it rather than I felt with the Jasmine Throne where I wanted to read it. I wanted to see what was coming next. This felt more like an obligation, which is so sad because as I finished it up, I did like the story, the plot itself. The setting is pretty good too. I would say the setting and the plot, really interesting, really compelling. But this book's biggest flaw is the writing itself. I think I mentioned it in one of my previous updates that it is very telly and not showy. It does a lot of, as you know, Bob, kind of info dumping. It's especially bad in the beginning, as you would expect for a lot of world building for a fantasy setting. It continues, especially in one particular character's perspectives. Hassa is thinking about herself and about her own goals and her own motivations in a way that I don't think a person would. It is very much for the reader's benefit. And when you're that heavy-handed, it's jarring and it takes you out of it. And it did for me. That isn't even the most egregious thing I think about the writing. I think what is that the writing in this book did not seem to care about the major plot beats. I think the way I described it in my journal was that the meat of this book, the vast majority of pages dedicated in this book are to build up to certain events, and then the events take 2 or 3 pages. And then it's just build up again for the next thing. And while that sounds like any book, a lot of it is the major beats and there are things in between that build up to those beats. I'm talking this is a book with a competition in it, and there are 6 trials. And I have never read a book with a competition that was so completely uninterested in actually showing you the competition. I mean, literally, probably less than 20 pages were actually dedicated on the trials, during the trials themselves, showing the character's perspective while she was undertaking the trial. And these are stealth trials, combat trials, logic trials, like stuff that like required her to really think through things and work and do combat and all this stuff, and it just spent no time on them. And okay, fine, whatever. Maybe the trials weren't really the point, and she was breezing over them because it was really the meat in between that made the story. Okay, fine, whatever. But she also did it with the romance, and I do think that the romance was built up like in a satisfactory way. Like, yes, okay, I can see how the romance would culminate at the end. But it was like one page. When the two characters kissed for the first time, I missed it because she doesn't really dwell on it. She just moves on. And I didn't like that. I wanted the narration to linger more in those moments and spend less time fretting about the next major event that was going to happen. And I think that is probably the biggest flaw of this book, is that we just spend so much time worrying about the next thing, and then when the next thing happens, it's nothing. It's not nothing to the characters, but it's nothing to the reader because the author spends no time on it. What's funny is that I did end up reading the pages pretty quickly, and I wasn't skimming, and I wasn't like intentionally not reading deeply like I did towards the end of The Bridge Kingdom, but at the same time, I could read less deeply and not miss anything because the author was just like, it felt like she was skimming over events. It ended up just being a big letdown because I did really like the plot. I really did like the setting. I really was intrigued by certain elements of like the history of the world and what the motivations of certain characters. I wanted to see more of Hassa, but at the same time, Hassa's like perspectives were some of the most frustrating because those were the most egregious examples of like the info dumping and like the as you know Bob and the very ham-fisted way of delivering information to the reader. But she was so underutilized. I just stopped caring really about Honor and Scylla. We just spent so much time watching their day-to-day almost, and nothing at all in the important moments between them, even their romance. All of that to say, I probably will read the sequel because I do like, again, the plot. The plot is good. It's just everything surrounding it completely let it down. But I am intrigued. Like I said, I can't resist a good Middle Eastern style fantasy. And I really love like the overturning of the empire and uncovering secrets and about how they came into power, like what else is out there and all of that. I'm so intrigued by all of that. And I think I probably could read another book with this style of writing in the end and find it worth it to read the plot. It's just, I just feel like this is an example of like an author having a really great idea. I don't know Sarah El-Arifi's like history. I do believe this is her debut. It reads like a debut. I almost wonder if her agent and editor thought the same thing that I'm thinking, that the plot is so good and the setting is so good that it overwhelms the drawbacks. I just wish that Sarah El-Arifi had a little bit more experience or had a little bit more time to hone her craft before being thrust into this publishing deal, because it just feels very, very amateurish. That's the only way I can describe it. Very amateurish. But the plot's good. The plot's very good. So my CAW breakdown for this came down to characters. I gave a 5 with Hassa doing most of the legwork there. 7 atmosphere, I gave a 7. Right up my alley. Sand in everything. Love it. Writing, a 2. I probably should have given this a 1, but I am a person who has a hard time giving a 1 or a 10 on anything. So 2, and I just put bad. Plot, 8. Hits a lot of my own personal checkboxes and what I personally enjoy. Intrigue, I gave a 5. Poorly executed, but interesting. Logic, I gave a 5. There was one major reveal at the end that did feel a little like a cop-out. Well, that was a thing that the author really should have spent more time lingering over and explaining and putting onto the page more. I get it. It was at that time the climax was steamrolling through, and so there probably wasn't a lot of time, but figure it out, because that was something that needed more explanation on page. And then enjoyment, I gave a 4 because it was just so hard to feel motivated to pick it up. And my final star rating broke down to a 2.5. I did strongly consider a 3, but My comparison to the way that I feel is similar to when I read Leviathan Wakes, where I liked most of the things about that book, except the characters' perspectives that we were reading from were awful to me. And I gave that a 3. And I think for a book where it goes the other direction, where everything is weighing down the 1 or 2 good things, I don't know that it deserves necessarily the same rating. So 2.5. But I'm still probably going to read the sequel. I don't know that I'll keep my physical copy. I think maybe I'll just read the sequel and see how I feel about it before I decide if I want to get rid of this physical or pick up the other ones. That's a question for future Carrie. So, in the question of who did it better in terms of Middle Eastern and Southeast Asian inspired fantasy with a sapphic romance, an empire in turmoil, hidden magic, ambitious female characters, a long-lost brother in arms with mysterious motivations. There are a lot of things that these books had in common, although they went in wildly different directions. But in terms of just those buzzwords and the settings and all that, in my opinion, The Jasmine Throne was the superior book. It had me the most excited to pick up. It had like the most natural progression. The different perspectives were far and away more interesting than we got in these. Much more nuanced. The writing far and away more mature. And by that I mean like advanced and experienced. I will say that the final Strife wins out in setting. Purely in setting. I think I liked this one. Final Strife better. With that finally wraps up this Who Wore It Better reading vlog. This is a new kind of vlog for me, a new experience, a little bit of an experiment as well. Please let me know in the comments what you thought, and if you have 2 books that you think would fit nicely into this kind of series. 2 books that have very similar buzzwords, very similar, maybe similar settings or similar character dynamics. I would love to do another one of these. Again, the point isn't to pit books against each other, but to critique the different approaches the two authors might take to very, very similar plot beats and ideas in that regard. So I had a lot of fun. I'm glad I read both of these books. The Final Strife was one of my 27 priority reads for 2025. So hit a big checkbox there. I would say a successful experiment. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I so appreciate it. If you like my content and want to support the channel, please like and subscribe or consider leaving a comment down below. Tell me which one of these books you prefer if you've read them both. And of course, I'm always taking book recommendations. In my next video, I will have another week in my life style vlog for you. I hope you look forward to it, and I will see you then. Bye.